All right, so we are going to be looking at Maniac Magee. This is one of my favorite books. This is a book that I'm only supposed to teach like one chapter at the beginning and one chapter at the middle to students, just like we do with The Secret Garden or Alice in Wonderland. But I end up teaching the whole book. And when I first started, we only ever had one copy of the book, so I had to teach it and students had to listen. Last year, I think we had 3 or 4 copies of the book, so a few students could follow along. This year, you have the option of having the book in front of you and reading it on your own and then doing assignments. You have the option of reading it, following along with me like we do in class, where I'll read it to you and you follow along in the text. And then you also have the option of just listening to me and going back to the text when you need some text-based evidence for an assignment. But Maniac Magee is is one of my probably my favorite book that I get to teach. And like I said, I'm only supposed to do 2 chapters from it. We end up reading the whole thing every year towards the end of the LEAP test in the beginning of May. Maniac Magee came out in 1990, but it's reflecting on Maniac's childhood. So the story probably takes place in the 1970s in a city somewhere up north. And the reason that's important is you have to understand it's the 1970s. It's not the American South. In class, we've looked at articles about segregation, Jim Crow laws that kept black people and white people separate from one another and treated black people poorly. This is not that era, and this is not that location. However, in this story, we will see that there is the West End and the East End of this city, and black people live in one section and white people live in the other, and they tend to not they tend to have different views of the people who live in the opposite end of town. And our main character doesn't see those things, and that's going to come into play. And so you have to understand that context. This is a context where even though there are not the laws that keep people separate, people are separated socially. That means socially would be, who are your neighbors? Where do you go to school at? Who are your friends? Are there people that you're not allowed to associate with? You're not allowed to talk to. You would never think of being friends with. Schools you would never think of going to. That's kind of the world of Maniac Magee. And in Maniac Magee's world, white people and black people, for the most part, are separate. They may go occasionally to the same school, but they tend to live in separate areas, and they have views of one another. And there are people in their neighborhoods who don't like people from the other side of town who have a different skin color. And so again, Maniac doesn't see those things, but you need to understand that context to know what's going on in the story. And there's a lot of distrust between these 2 groups. So even though things have changed today, there's always going to be another group of people that people in one area of town or one part of the country or one neighborhood don't trust or have stereotypical views of. And why do they have those views? Because they don't know them. So we live in this world, in Maniac Magee's world, where people in one section of town don't know, trust, understand, or have any interactions with people from the other end of town, and vice versa. And so you have to know that to understand what's going on in this story. But it's my favorite book to teach. I hope you enjoy it. I hope that it brings a little relief during this time, and it's a way for us to continue reading together and talking about what we've read.